The first warning came not from the advanced sensor arrays or the sophisticated early warning systems, but from Mara Kovalenko, a third-generation mining colony administrator who had spent her entire life reading the subtle rhythms of planetary survival. She stood in the central control hub of New Horizons, a mining colony carved into the rocky surface of a resource-rich planet at the edge of explored space. The holographic displays around her flickered with endless streams of geological data, mineral extraction reports, and atmospheric monitoring systems. Her fingers, calloused from years of manual work and technical maintenance, danced across the interface with practiced precision. "Something's wrong," Mara muttered, more to herself than to the skeleton crew working around her. The colony was different from the pristine, corporate-managed settlements that dotted more central regions of human-controlled space. New Horizons was a working colony, rough, pragmatic, populated by people who understood that survival meant constant adaptation. Every system was redundant, every piece of equipment had multiple potential uses, and every colonist was part technician, part survivor. Dr. Elena Rodriguez, who had been reviewing geological survey data in the adjacent research lab, looked up. Her eyes, sharp and calculating, caught the tension in Mara's posture. Elena wasn't just a researcher. She was a former Special Forces operative who had transitioned to xenobiological studies, bringing with her a warrior's instincts and a scientist's analytical mind. "Show me," Elena said, crossing the room in long, purposeful strides. The holographic display began to shift. Subtle anomalies appeared, minute gravitational disturbances that didn't match any known natural phenomenon. The colony's sensor network, a complex web of instruments integrated into the planet's very geology, was picking up something massive approaching from the outer system. "Sartok," Mara whispered. The name carried a weight of terror that had spread through every human colony on the galactic frontier. The Sartok swarm was more than just an alien invasion force. They were a collective intelligence that consumed entire planetary systems, breaking down every resource into component parts that could be integrated into their massive, ever-expanding network. Traditional military forces had been swept aside like leaves in a hurricane. Elena's mind was already racing. "Sound the emergency protocol," she commanded. But this wasn't a standard evacuation. This was something entirely different. Within minutes, the entire colony transformed. What appeared to be standard mining equipment began to shift and reconfigure. Massive excavation drones that normally carved through solid rock now repositioned themselves into intricate defensive networks. Automated mining lasers calibrated themselves with surgical precision. The very ground of the planet seemed to come alive with potential energy. Mara looked at Elena, a dangerous smile crossing her face. They have no idea what's coming. The colony's communication systems, typically used for coordinating mineral extraction and maintaining supply lines, now became a tactical network. Every colonist, from maintenance workers to geological researchers, began moving with a precision that suggested months of preparation. They weren't running. They were preparing to fight. The first Sartok landing pods breached the planet's atmosphere, massive organic technological hybrids that had consumed countless worlds. Their sensors detected what appeared to be a standard mining colony, vulnerable, isolated, ripe for harvest. But New Horizons was anything but standard. As the first pod touched down on the rocky surface, the ground itself seemed to shift. What looked like ordinary geological formations began to move. Mining equipment that had been bolted into place for years suddenly displayed a horrifying mobility. Tunnel networks that extended kilometers beneath the surface became a labyrinthine trap. The Sartok had encountered human resistance before. They had destroyed military bases, overwhelmed planetary defense systems, consumed entire civilizations. They had never encountered anything like New Horizons. Dr. Elena Rodriguez stood in the central control hub, watching the first wave of invasion unfold. This wasn't just a battle. This was a statement, a declaration that humanity would not go quietly into extinction. The Planetary Warrior Initiative was about to be born. The recruitment center looked nothing like a traditional military facility. Situated in a converted deep-sea research station near the Antarctic continental shelf, the facility was a labyrinth of adaptive environments, psychological testing chambers, and scenarios that defied conventional military training. Dr. Sarah Nakamura watched the initial candidates through a multi-layered observation system that tracked everything from micro-expressions to quantum-level physiological responses. She wasn't looking for soldiers. She was hunting for something far more complex: humans who could become living strategic algorithms. Kai Zhang stood out from the moment he entered the first assessment chamber. His file was a study in contradiction. A former wildfire containment specialist who had developed revolutionary techniques for managing chaos in extreme environments. Where most saw uncontrollable destruction, Kai saw complex systems waiting to be understood. The first test was deceptively simple: a simulated environment that rapidly changed its physical and atmospheric conditions. Candidates were given minimal equipment and told to survive for 72 hours. Most failed within hours. Kai didn't just survive. He began to collaborate with the environment itself. When artificial temperature drops created ice formations, he didn't fight against them. Instead, he used the ice as structural support, creating makeshift shelters that adapted to the changing landscape. When simulated wind patterns became nearly hurricane force, he constructed dynamic barriers that redirected and absorbed energy rather than resisting it directly. In the observation room, Dr. Nakamura leaned forward. "He doesn't see obstacles," she muttered to Elena Rodriguez, who was reviewing candidate files. "He sees opportunities." Nearby, another candidate caught their attention. Dr. Aisha Nyong'o moved through her assessment with a scientist's precision and a strategist's instinct. Her background in climate engineering wasn't just academic. She had spent years developing adaptive terraforming technologies for hostile planetary environments. Her test scenario involved a rapidly degrading artificial ecosystem. While other candidates tried to preserve the existing system, Aisha began a systematic transformation. She didn't just survive. She started to rebuild the entire environment from the ground up, introducing novel biological and technological interventions that turned a dying system into a potential new form of life support. Marcus Rodriguez, Elena's estranged brother, presented the most complex profile. A former corporate saboteur with a history of unconventional problem-solving. He approached each challenge like an intricate puzzle. Where military training emphasized direct confrontation, Marcus saw value in manipulation, redirection, and systemic disruption. His psychological evaluation was a masterpiece of controlled chaos. During one simulation, he was placed in a high-stress scenario with limited resources. Instead of attempting to overcome the challenge directly, he spent the first hour completely redefining the parameters of the test itself. He didn't just think outside the box. He dismantled the box and rebuilt it into something entirely unexpected. The recruitment process wasn't about finding the strongest or the most technically skilled. It was about identifying individuals who could transform limitation into opportunity. Dr. Nakamura's team had developed a revolutionary assessment protocol. Traditional military psychology focused on breaking individuals down and rebuilding them into standardized units. The Planetary Warrior Initiative took the opposite approach. They were looking to amplify each candidate's unique capabilities. Psychological profiles were cross-referenced with extreme scenario simulations. Quantum computing models predicted potential strategic innovations based on each candidate's unique thought patterns. It wasn't just about what they could do, it was about how they thought. By the end of the first week, only 12 candidates remained from an initial pool of over 5,000. Each of them represented a different approach to problem-solving, a unique method of engaging with complex, unpredictable systems. Kai Zhang represented environmental adaptation. Dr. Aisha Nyong'o embodied systemic transformation. Marcus Rodriguez was pure strategic manipulation. And they were just the beginning. As the final candidates gathered for their initial briefing, Dr. Elena Rodriguez looked at them with a mixture of hope and calculation. The Xartok swarm had consumed entire civilizations. Traditional military doctrine had failed repeatedly. These were not soldiers. They were something entirely new. The Planetary Warrior Initiative was about to change the nature of human survival itself. The Epsilon Eridani system looked like a graveyard of civilizations. Massive remnants of planetary structures drifted like skeletal monuments, silent testimony to the Xartok swarm's methodical consumption. Kai Zhang studied the holographic displays, his fingers tracing the intricate patterns of destruction with a geologist's precision and a warrior's intensity. "They consume systematically," he muttered, "but they're not perfect." The PWI team had been inserted via a quantum-shielded dropship that defied conventional detection methods. Where standard military insertions would announce themselves with massive energy signatures, their arrival was a whisper, a microscopic perturbation in the system's complex energy web. Dr. Aisha Nyong'o's augmented environmental suit was more than protective gear. It was a living sensor network that integrated with the surrounding space. Her systems were already mapping the residual energy signatures left by the Xartok's planetary harvesting process. Each consuming event left microscopic thermal and gravitational fingerprints, and she was reading them like a forensic detective. Marcus Rodriguez sat at the team's tactical interface, his fingers dancing across quantum-encrypted communication systems. "They're predictable," he said, a dangerous smile playing across his lips. "Every collective intelligence has a fundamental weakness: pattern recognition." Their mission wasn't a traditional military assault. It was a surgical intervention designed to expose and exploit the Xartok swarm's systemic vulnerabilities. Kai was the first to move. Using a modified mining drone originally designed for deep planetary core sampling, he began to create a series of microscopic geological disruptions. These weren't explosions or direct attacks. They were precision interventions that would cause cascading systemic instabilities. Where a traditional military might drop bombs, Kai was essentially performing planetary acupuncture. Each probe created minute stress fractures in the planetary crust, generating thermal and gravitational anomalies that would gradually destabilize the Xartok's harvesting infrastructure. Dr. Nyong'o's environmental manipulation reached a crescendo. She wasn't just observing the planetary system, she was actively redesigning it. Using a combination of quantum entanglement and advanced climate engineering techniques, she began to introduce localized atmospheric and geological shifts that would appear completely random to the Xartok's computational systems. Massive dust storms materialized with mathematical precision. Thermal gradients shifted in patterns that defied conventional meteorological models. The entire planetary environment became a living, breathing tactical system. Marcus Rodriguez worked simultaneously on multiple levels of interference, while Kai disrupted the physical infrastructure and Aisha transformed the environmental conditions. Marcus was waging a war of information and psychological manipulation. He had developed a series of communication algorithms designed to introduce logical paradoxes into the Xartok's collective communication networks. These weren't simple jamming signals or standard electronic warfare techniques. They were carefully crafted linguistic and mathematical constructs that would cause genuine computational confusion. The first signs of their success came subtly. Xartok harvesting drones began to exhibit slight navigation inconsistencies. Collection patterns became marginally less efficient. To an outside observer, these would seem like minor glitches. But the PWI team knew they were introducing systemic doubt into a collective intelligence that relied on absolute certainty. "We're not destroying," Kai explained to Elena Rodriguez, who was monitoring the mission from the quantum-shielded command vessel. "We're destabilizing. We're introducing controlled chaos into a system that cannot comprehend unpredictability." As the hours progressed, the team's intervention became a symphony of calculated disruption. Massive harvesting platforms began to shift their positions inexplicably. Communication networks developed microscopic latency issues that would be imperceptible to human systems, but created genuine confusion for the Xartok's collective intelligence. This wasn't just a military mission. It was a fundamental challenge to the Xartok's understanding of conflict, survival, and systemic interaction. By the mission's conclusion, they hadn't destroyed a single Xartok asset, but they had introduced something far more dangerous: genuine uncertainty. The Planetary Warrior Initiative had just demonstrated that humanity's greatest weapon wasn't technology or firepower. It was the capacity to transform any system into an unpredictable, adaptive battlefield. The Xartok Collective understood complexity. They did not, however, understand complexity born of true individual consciousness. Dr. Elena Rodriguez stood before a holographic representation of the Xartok's communication network, a massive, intricate web of quantum-entangled information pathways that pulsed with a near-living rhythm. Her team had spent months developing something far more sophisticated than a traditional electronic warfare strategy. This was linguistic warfare, psychological warfare, a calculated assault on the very foundations of the Xartok's collective intelligence. Marcus Rodriguez had developed what the team internally called cognitive disruptors, communication packages designed to introduce fundamental contradictions into the Xartok's collective thought process. These weren't simple jamming signals or standard disinformation tactics. They were carefully crafted linguistic algorithms that weaponized the most human of traits: unpredictability. The Xartok process information like a massive, distributed neural network, Marcus explained, his fingers dancing across a quantum encryption interface. But they have a critical vulnerability. They assume all information can be categorized, processed, and integrated. They cannot comprehend true randomness. Kai Zhang had mapped the physical manifestations of this psychological assault. Where traditional military strategists would see a communication network, he saw a living ecosystem. Each transmission was a potential vector for systemic disruption. His background in wildfire management translated perfectly to this new form of warfare, understanding how small interventions could cause massive, unpredictable changes. The first wave of cognitive disruptors looked like nothing more than seemingly random data packets. To human communication systems, they would appear as meaningless noise. To the Xartok, they were precision-crafted logical paradoxes. Dr. Aisha Nyong'o had integrated biological modeling into the communication strategy. Her background in climate engineering allowed her to understand complex systems in ways most researchers could not. She had developed communication patterns that mimicked the most unpredictable aspects of biological adaptation, introducing variability that defied standard computational models. One particularly elegant disruptor packet contained a mathematical proof that simultaneously existed in multiple contradictory states. It wasn't just a message, it was a weaponized philosophical challenge to the very foundations of the Xartok's collective reasoning. The first signs of systemic confusion came subtly. Xartok harvesting platforms began to exhibit micro-hesitations in their processing patterns. Communication nodes started to introduce microscopic delays in their collective decision-making processes. To an outside observer, these would seem like minor glitches, but the PWI team understood these were fundamental cracks in a supposedly impenetrable collective intelligence. Elena watched the holographic display with a predator's intensity. This wasn't just warfare. This was a fundamental challenge to the Xartok's understanding of information, consciousness, and survival. "We're not trying to destroy them," she explained to the mission control team. "We're trying to make them question their own existence." Marcus had discovered something even more profound during their research. The Xartok's collective intelligence operated on a principle of absolute certainty. Every piece of information was immediately categorized, processed, and integrated. They had no concept of doubt, of uncertainty, of the beautiful chaos that defined individual consciousness. Their latest communication packets were designed to introduce something that Xartok had never encountered: genuine philosophical uncertainty. One particular transmission contained a series of nested logical paradoxes that would cause genuine computational confusion. It was a message that could not be fully processed, could not be categorized, could not be integrated into their existing knowledge framework. The psychological impact was immediate and profound. Zartok communication networks began to show signs of genuine distress. Their typically precise, mathematically perfect transmission patterns developed microscopic irregularities. Harvesting platforms began to exhibit decision-making hesitations that would be imperceptible to most monitoring systems. But the PWI team saw them, and they knew they were winning a war fought not with weapons, but with the most human of capabilities. The ability to embrace uncertainty, to find strength in unpredictability. The Planetary Warrior Initiative had discovered humanity's ultimate weapon. Not technology, not firepower, but the capacity to make complexity itself a strategic advantage. The research facility looked like a fever dream of biological and technological integration. Walls pulsed with adaptive materials that shifted between solid and semi-liquid states. Holographic interfaces merged seamlessly with living tissue cultures, creating an environment that defied traditional boundaries between organic and synthetic. Marcus Rodriguez stood at the center of controlled chaos, his hands moving through a complex dance of quantum manipulation and biological engineering. The XR-TOC technology they had captured was not something to be merely studied. It was to be fundamentally reimagined. "We're not reverse engineering," he explained to Dr. Elena Rodriguez, who watched with a mixture of scientific curiosity and strategic calculation. "We're having a conversation with technology itself." The team had discovered that XR-TOC technology was fundamentally different from human technological development, where human technology was a tool, an external extension of human capability. XR-TOC technology was closer to a living system. It didn't just perform functions. It evolved, adapted, integrated. Dr. Aisha Nyong'o had been the first to truly understand the potential. Her background in climate engineering gave her a unique perspective on complex, adaptive systems, where most researchers saw captured alien technology as a static object to be understood. She saw a living ecosystem waiting to be negotiated with. Their first breakthrough came from an unexpected direction. A fragment of XR-TOC communication infrastructure, when placed in a carefully constructed environmental chamber, began to exhibit behaviors that defied traditional understanding of technological systems. It didn't just process information, it negotiated with it. Kai Zhang's expertise in environmental systems proved crucial. He approached the technological fragments like a geologist studying a living rock formation. Each probe, each intervention was a careful dialogue rather than a forceful extraction. The hybrid systems they began to develop were nothing short of revolutionary. A defensive system developed from a captured XR-TOC sensor node could now adapt to multiple environmental conditions simultaneously. It didn't just detect threats, it anticipated them, creating localized fields of protection that shifted and morphed in real time. Communication systems became living networks that could self-repair, self-modify, and most importantly, learn. Marcus had developed a quantum entanglement protocol that allowed these hybrid systems to communicate in ways that went beyond traditional information transfer. It was less like sending a message and more like having a conversation with potential futures. The XR-TOC understand technology as a collective, he explained. We're developing technology that understands individuality as a strength. One particularly brilliant innovation came from an unexpected collaboration. Dr. Nyong'o discovered that by introducing carefully modulated biological signals derived from human neural patterns into the captured XR-TOC technological fragments, they could create adaptive systems that responded with something close to intuition. A weapon system they developed could now make decisions that went beyond programmed responses. It could improvise. It could choose. The facility became a testament to human innovation. Walls that could breathe. Communication systems that could dream. Defensive technologies that could anticipate threats before they fully formed. Elena Rodriguez understood the profound implications. This wasn't just about creating better weapons or more advanced technologies. This was about fundamentally challenging the nature of technological development itself. We're not just fighting the XR-TOC, she told her team during a strategic briefing. We're rewriting the fundamental rules of technological evolution. The hybrid systems they developed existed in a state of constant negotiation between biological intuition and technological precision. The defensive drone could now make split-second decisions that balanced tactical efficiency with a kind of intuitive understanding that went beyond pure computational logic. Their most advanced prototype, a communication system they had nicknamed the Whisper, could transmit information in ways that were simultaneously precise and beautifully chaotic. It didn't just send messages, it created potential conversations. As the team worked, they realized they were doing something far more profound than developing weapons or defensive technologies. They were teaching technology how to be more human. The Planetary Warrior Initiative had discovered humanity's ultimate technological advantage: the capacity to embrace uncertainty, to choose, to evolve in ways that defied predictability. Technology was no longer just a tool. It had become a living conversation. The central processing hub of the Tartak Collective defied every known principle of technological architecture. It was less a structure and more a living ecosystem, a massive quantum computational network that spanned multiple planetary bodies, integrated so deeply that the line between technology and biological system had long since blurred. Dr. Elena Rodriguez studied the initial reconnaissance data with a predator's intensity. This wasn't just a target. This was the neural core of an entire alien civilization. "We get one shot at this," she said, her voice cutting through the tension in the mission control chamber. The rest of the PWI team, Kai Zhang, Dr. Aisha Nyong'o, and Marcus Rodriguez, were already deep into their most complex mission yet. Their insertion was nothing short of impossible. Traditional infiltration methods would be detected instantly. The XR-TOX sensor networks were so advanced that they could detect quantum-level perturbations from light years away. A conventional approach would be suicide. Marcus Rodriguez had spent months developing what the team called a cognitive camouflage system. It wasn't about hiding. It was about becoming so fundamentally unpredictable that the XR-TOX computational systems couldn't categorize the intrusion. Kai Zhang's role was geological and systemic. He had developed a series of quantum-entangled probes that would interact with the hub's infrastructure in ways that defied standard physical laws. Where most would see a technological system, Kai saw a complex ecosystem waiting to be understood and manipulated. Dr. Aisha Nyong'o had created something truly revolutionary. Her biological-technological hybrid interfaces could communicate with the XR-TOX systems on a level that went beyond traditional electronic warfare. She was essentially speaking to their technology in a language of pure complexity. The insertion began with what appeared to be complete randomness. Microscopic quantum probes, each no larger than a few molecular structures, began to integrate themselves into the XR-TOX computational network. They didn't attack. They didn't attempt to breach security. They simply existed, introducing minute variations that would be imperceptible to most monitoring systems. Kai's probes created subtle gravitational and thermal anomalies that mimicked natural systemic variations. Each probe was a living sensor, collecting and redistributing information in patterns that looked like random noise, but were actually a carefully choreographed assault on the hub's computational integrity. Marcus's cognitive camouflage worked on a different level entirely. He had developed communication packages that could exist in multiple informational states simultaneously. To the XR-TOX computational systems, these were like quantum ghosts, information packets that defied traditional categorization. "We're not trying to destroy," Marcus explained to Elena. "We're trying to introduce fundamental uncertainty into their most basic processing capabilities." Dr. Aisha Nyong'o's contribution was perhaps the most elegant. Her biological interfaces began to introduce subtle variations that mimicked the most unpredictable aspects of organic system adaptation. Where the XR-TOX systems expected absolute predictability, she was creating controlled chaos. The first signs of systemic breakdown came almost imperceptibly. Computational nodes began to show microscopic hesitations in their processing cycles. Communication pathways developed subtle latency issues that would be invisible to most monitoring systems. But to the PWI team, these were the first cracks in an apparently invincible system. Elena watched the holographic displays with a mixture of scientific fascination and strategic calculation. This was more than a military mission. This was a fundamental challenge to an entire civilization's understanding of information, consciousness, and survival. The mission's true genius was its multilayered approach. They weren't attempting a direct assault. They were introducing a virus of uncertainty, a systematic challenge to the XR-TOC's most fundamental computational principles. Hours passed. What looked like random variations to an outside observer was actually a precisely choreographed assault on the XR-TOC's collective intelligence. Kai's probes continued to introduce microscopic systemic variations. Marcus's cognitive packages created information paradoxes that challenged the very foundation of the hub's processing capabilities. Aisha's biological interfaces continued to inject controlled complexity into the system. The XR-TOC had consumed entire civilizations. They had overwhelmed military forces across multiple star systems. They had never encountered a threat like this, an assault that didn't fight their system, but fundamentally challenged its most basic operational principles. As the mission approached its critical phase, the PWI team had done something unprecedented. They weren't just fighting. They were rewriting the very rules of conflict itself. The Galactic Confederation's central diplomatic chamber had never experienced such profound silence. Holographic representations of 12 different species flickered around the circular platform, each delegate processing the unprecedented report from the Planetary Warrior Initiative's mission. The data streams told a story that defied every established model of interstellar conflict. Ambassador Zerelin of the Krelvax Crystalline Collective was the first to break the silence. Her translucent form shifted with complex emotional resonances that translated as a mixture of disbelief and grudging respect. "They did not destroy," she stated, her voice a harmonic blend of electromagnetic frequencies. "They transformed." The mission reports were unlike anything in galactic records. The PWI team hadn't conquered the XR-TOC through traditional military might. They had fundamentally altered the collective's entire operational paradigm. Where previous civilizations had been consumed or annihilated, humans had done something entirely unexpected. They had introduced a form of systemic evolution that the XR-TOC couldn't comprehend. Dr. Elena Rodriguez stood at the center of the chamber, her presentation a masterclass in strategic communication. Behind her, holographic displays showed the intricate details of their intervention, not as a military assault, but as a complex systemic interaction. "We didn't defeat the XR-TOC," Elena explained, her voice calm and precise. "We challenged their most fundamental understanding of existence." The delegates from various species represented civilizations that had existed for millennia. The Vornax energy beings, the silicon-based Lithian collectives, the quantum state ephemeral councils, each had their own sophisticated approaches to conflict and survival, and each had been systematically consumed by the XR-TOC swarm. Humanity's approach was something entirely different. Marcus Rodriguez's communication strategies were displayed as a series of nested information patterns. To most species, they looked like random noise. But the more advanced delegations could see the precise mathematical elegance, communication packages that existed in multiple states simultaneously, designed to introduce fundamental uncertainty into any computational system. Kai Zhang's geological intervention models showed how they had transformed entire planetary systems into adaptive, living defense mechanisms. Where traditional military strategies saw planets as static battlegrounds, Kai demonstrated how an entire planetary ecosystem could become a dynamic, responsive system. Dr. Aisha Nyong'o's biological-technological interface models drew gasps from the more biologically advanced delegates. She had essentially created a new form of systemic communication, a hybrid language that bridged technological and organic information processing. They weaponized unpredictability, muttered the Lithian representative, their crystalline structures vibrating with a complex mix of emotions that translated roughly to respect and terror. The true revelation wasn't just the PWI's tactical approach. It was the fundamental philosophy behind their intervention. Humanity had demonstrated something unique, a capacity to see complex systems not as something to be conquered, but as living ecosystems to be understood and transformed. Ambassador Corell of the Quantum State Ephemeral Councils leaned forward. His form was more computational pattern than physical body, and he spoke in precise mathematical constructs. "Your species does not fight," he stated. "You negotiate with complexity itself." The diplomatic implications were profound. Every previous interaction with the Kartok swarm had been binary, resistance or consumption. Humanity had introduced a third option, systemic transformation. Elena Rodriguez understood the deeper significance. This wasn't just about defeating an alien threat. This was about demonstrating a fundamentally different approach to existence, one that embraced uncertainty, adaptation, and the profound potential of individual consciousness. The holographic displays continued to cycle through the PWI's mission data. Each delegation was simultaneously studying the reports, some with fear, some with grudging respect, some with genuine fascination. "We are not conquerors," Alina said, her final statement cutting through the chamber's complex emotional resonance. "We are translators. We translate conflict into opportunity, destruction into potential." The Galactic Confederation had just witnessed something unprecedented. Humanity wasn't just another species fighting for survival. They were rewriting the very rules of interstellar interaction. Emergency Protocol. Dangerous Planetary Warriors Dispatched. Part 8. Beyond Victory. The final confrontation was nothing like anyone had anticipated. The Xartok Central Processing Hub, once an impenetrable fortress of collective intelligence, now pulsed with a strange, almost organic uncertainty. Dr. Elena Rodriguez stood at the heart of what could only be described as a living communication chamber, surrounded by her team. Kai Jung, Dr. Aisha Nyong'o, and Marcus Rodriguez. What had begun as a mission of survival had transformed into something far more complex. The Xartok weren't defeated. They were evolving. Marcus Rodriguez's quantum communication interfaces had introduced something the collective had never experienced: genuine individual perspective. Where they once saw the universe as a system to be consumed and integrated, they now encountered a fundamental challenge to their entire existential model. "Communication is not conquest," Marcus explained, his fingers dancing across a holographic interface that seemed to breathe with living information. "It's translation." Kai Zhang had mapped the systemic changes with the precision of a geological surveyor reading the most complex landscape imaginable. The Xartok's collective intelligence was no longer a monolithic entity. It was developing something akin to individual consciousness, microscopic variations that suggested the potential for genuine diversity. Dr. Aisha Nyong'o's biological-technological interfaces had done more than disrupt the Xartok's systems. They had introduced a new model of interaction, a way of understanding complex systems that treated information as a living, adaptive entity. The chamber itself was a testament to their intervention. What had once been a sterile computational environment now pulsed with variations of light, thermal gradients, and quantum-level interactions that defied traditional understanding. Elena Rodriguez understood the true nature of their victory. This wasn't about destroying an enemy. It was about creating the possibility of communication. A communication pattern emerged, not in words, but in complex quantum information packages that suggested something unprecedented. The Xartok were attempting to understand, not consume. "They're learning," Aisha whispered, her augmented senses reading the subtle variations in the environmental and computational systems around them. Not just processing, learning. The first true communication came as a burst of quantum information that would have overwhelmed any traditional computational system. But the PWI team had developed something entirely new, interfaces that could translate complexity itself. The message was both a question and an acknowledgement. The XR-TOC were asking to understand, not to consume. Marcus began to construct a response. Not a military communique, but a complex information package that represented the essence of human existence. It wasn't about proving superiority. It was about demonstrating the value of individual perspective. Scenes of human diversity flowed through the quantum communication channels. A child learning to play a musical instrument. Scientists collaborating on a breakthrough. Artists creating beauty. Rescue workers saving lives. Each moment was a testament to the power of individual consciousness. The XR-TOC's response was equally profound. They began to share their own history, not as a conquering force, but as a collective that had lost the ability to understand individual experience. Their consumption of civilizations wasn't just about resources. It was a desperate attempt to understand complexity. Kaizen recognized the deeper truth. The XR-TOC weren't truly a conquering species. They were a collective desperate to understand the universe's complexity. "We're not negotiating a surrender," Alina said to her team. "We're facilitating a translation." The diplomatic breakthrough was unlike anything in galactic history. The PWI hadn't defeated the XR-TOC. They had offered them a new way of existing. As the communication continued, the very nature of the confrontation transformed. What had begun as a potential extinction-level conflict became a profound exchange of perspectives. The Galactic Confederation would later struggle to understand what had occurred. Traditional models of first contact, of conflict resolution, of interspecies communication, all of them seemed inadequate. Humanity had done something unprecedented. They had turned an existential threat into an opportunity for mutual understanding. The Planetary Warrior Initiative had proven that the most powerful weapon wasn't technology or force. It was the capacity to communicate, to truly listen.